Hi everyone, and welcome back to Cardiac Radio for Teens. For those of you who don't know, Cardiac Radio for Teens is a place where teens can come together with other teens to learn about Spiritist teachings and topics in a way that makes more sense to us and is more relatable to us as teenagers in today's society. For the past few weeks now, we've been reading in the Spirits book, and we've been reading the section Earthly Joys and Sorrows. And in that section last week, we left off in the middle of the section Distaste for Life, Suicide, which is a very heavy topic, but is very important for us to talk about. So let's pick up right where we left off at question 947. If the struggle with adversity discourages a person, and he or she allows him or herself to die in despair, is it considered suicide? So here they're saying, if a person is struggling with a misfortune of something that's not great in their lives, and they allow themselves to die in despair, whether it might be intentional or unintentional, maybe they stop doing anything else because they're such in despair of their misfortune. So would that also be considered suicide? And the spirits answered, "This is suicide, but those who caused the crime or could have prevented it are more to blame than the victims, and the latter are judged compassionately. Nevertheless, they are not absolved completely if they have shown a lack of resolve and perseverance, or have failed to make the best of their intelligence to help themselves. It is even harder for them if pride paralyzes their intelligence, or they are embarrassed to earn a living by manual labor and prefer to die of starvation rather than deviate from their social standing. Is there not a hundredfold more honor and dignity in bearing adversity, bearing the ill-natured remarks of the vain and selfish, whose goodwill is only for those who are in want for nothing, and who turn a cold shoulder to all who are in need of help? To throw away one's life on account of such people is even more absurd, seeing that they are completely indifferent to the sacrifice." So here they're saying, yes, this is despair. So whoever caused the misfortune would be more at fault, because that person caused that misfortune, which then led that person to feel terrible to the point of despair where they thought that suicide was the answer. So that person is going to be extra responsible for that because they caused that misfortune. But like they said here, the person who commits suicide is never going to be completely off the hook. There's never going to be a justifiable reason. They're always going to have to repay for that mistake that they made. And yes, some cases are worse than others. Some they might think that it was really despair, but nevertheless there is some consequences. And then they're saying here, in such cases when we're just looking at what other people have, and we don't want to take on manual labor because that's not in our social standing. We don't want to go below our social standing to take on that job of manual labor, so we'd rather just suffer and even get to the point of suicide than to just not have this pride and just lower ourselves into that different class. Or there might be people who are mean. There's always people who are mean, but think about who those people are. They're not thinking about you, about your goodwill. So by someone throwing away their life, that's not helping the other person, or the other person doesn't care. If they really are that mean, they're not really taking care of that person. They don't really care for that person at all. So throwing away one's life for that person, that's ridiculous, because that person already doesn't care. Why am I going to take the most precious thing I have away from myself just so that other person feels bad? There's some things that we think oh, but if this person knew. But sometimes if they're not that evolved, they're not going to realize. They're not going to come to that understanding. Eventually, they will. Eventually, they're going to have to go through trials, and they're going to have to learn from their mistakes of being mean to someone and doing all these things. But we shouldn't throw away the most precious thing we have for that other person that's being mean to us, right? That's the most precious thing. Why are we wasting it on that person? And we have to keep in mind that we're all going to go through misfortunes, but there's always going to be people there to help us, to guide us, to be there with us. There's always going to be work for us to find, even if we have to go into another social standing. There'll be help for us. So we have to be on the lookout there and not get into that state of despair. Question 948. Is suicide as disgraceful when committed to escape the shame of having done wrong as when it is prompted by despair? So now here they're saying, is it as disgraceful? So before we were talking about like, oh, and you're in despair. But now what about to escape the shame? Like you did something wrong and you're so shameful of it that you want to commit suicide. Is that just as disgraceful? And the spirits answered, suicide does not erase a fault and is actually a second fault in addition to the first. People who have the courage to do wrong should have the courage to bear the consequences of their actions. God is our judge, and sometimes the circumstances may be a factor in diminishing the atonement. So here, suicide will not erase a fault. It's just going to add another one. So maybe you did one wrong thing, and now you're, wow, I'm so ashamed. I shouldn't have done that wrong thing. That was horrible of me. And eventually, we're going to have to repay for that one thing that we did wrong. And we know it's a lot more than one thing, but we're going to have to repay for those and make up for all those mistakes that we made. But then if we commit suicide on top of that, now that's just another mistake that we made. That's another thing we're going to have to repay, to work on, and get back to that level that we were at. And then here the really important thing that they say at the end is, God is our judge, and sometimes the circumstances may be a factor for diminishing the atonement. So maybe sometimes we went through something, and now we're learning and we're going through things that's going to help ourselves progress or move forward or evolve. Sometimes we have to go through something, right? Because technically, you don't know if you're going to be good at bad at riding a bike until you try it, until you do something. So sometimes we have to be put in those situations where we make mistakes so that we can learn from them and grow from them, fix them, and perfect them and move on. So that was in our plan. And okay, we made a little mistake, but it's better to just keep working on it and keep rebuilding it and fixing it than to make another big mistake on top of that. Question 949. Is suicide excusable when committed to avoid bringing disgrace to one's children or family? So now they're saying, what about to bring disgrace to the family? So maybe that person did a horrible crime, or they're in a bad state, and like no one likes them, but they don't want to bring disgrace to their family or to their children or put a bad name on their children, so they commit suicide. So is that excusable? And the spirits answered, people who act under this belief do no good, but they think they do, and God takes their intention into consideration. Intention lessens the fault, but it is a fault nevertheless. When you have eliminated your social prejudices and injustices, you will have no more suicide. So, yes, if you are doing it with the intention of other people, you really are truly thinking about other people, God is going to take that into consideration. He's going to see, oh wow, like you were trying to do best for other people, but you kind of messed up. But no matter what, you're still going to have those consequences. That was still a mistake you made, because we know that suicide is never the right thing to do. So there's always going to be that consequence. But of course the intentions are taken into consideration, so it wasn't a selfish reason. You were thinking about other people, but still wasn't the best thing to do. So it might not be as at fault, but it's still very much at fault. And of course we have to remember that we can't trick God. So if you were thinking about committing suicide, if you just say, oh, I'll just think that I'm doing this for someone else, it doesn't work like that, because God knows our true intentions and what we're truly feeling before maybe even we know them. So we can't just trick and say that that's our reason or our motive. But no matter what, that person will be at fault for committing suicide. No matter what the situation is, no matter how it happened, why it happened, that person will be at fault in some way, shape, or form. And then at the last line they put is, when you have eliminated your social prejudices and injustices, you will have no more suicide. Because what they're saying here is that in this situation, that person's bringing disgrace to their family because social prejudices and society thinks that they're disgraceful. Maybe they did something wrong and now they're a disgrace, or maybe they're just treated unfairly in society. So once we stop judging people or have all this prejudice and injustice, then there will be no more suicide, because that's a cause of so much of it, is us not treating people equally and not treating people nicely. And then Allan Kardec puts his own comment in, and he says, people who take their own lives to escape the shame of a bad action prove that they attached more value to the opinion of other people than that of God. They return to the spirit world burdened by their wrongdoings. As a result, they deprive themselves of the atonement planned for the current life. God is not as inexorable as human beings. God pardons those who sincerely repent and takes into account our efforts to remedy our wrongs, but suicide resolves nothing. So here what they're saying is that also when we're doing that, we're showing that we care more about what other people are thinking than what God thinks. Because we're like, oh, it's okay if I go against God's laws and I commit suicide, but it's not okay if these people are talking bad about me. And it shouldn't be that way, right? We should always be thinking of God first. So there's that important thing to keep in mind. And also, like they're saying, God's not going to make you suffer forever. You will come back from that. You will evolve, but it's just going to take you a lot longer. And you had atonements planned for this life to fix it, so you were evolving. Now you cut those short, and now we're not going to evolve on those. Plus we have to add more that we have to work on top of that. And God isn't going to be cruel or mean, and that's not going to be the end. But suicide is not going to resolve anything, and we're going to have to work even harder to make up for our mistakes. Question 950. What should we think of people who kill themselves, hoping to reach a happier state of existence sooner? So some people think, this life is terrible, I just want to be happy or be in heaven, so they commit suicide. So just so they can be there faster. And the spirits answered, what foolish logic! If a person does good work, he or she is much more certain of reaching that happiness. Suicide delays the entrance into a better world. Those who have committed this act eventually ask to come back to earth to complete the life that they mistakenly cut short. A fault, no matter what it may be, can never open the door to the sanctuary of the good. So here they're saying that doesn't make sense, because making a mistake, especially of that nature, is not going to open the doors to the good, right? You're not going to show up and it's going to be this great heavenly society where everything's perfect. People who do good work and who work hard and well, they're going to reach that level of happiness a lot faster than someone who commits suicide to try and get there. Because suicide is going to delay your entrance into a better world. Because now you have to stay there more. Now you have to wait for another life to fix more atonements, go through more things. So it's just going to delay your process. So really what they said here, that's a foolish logic to think that if we commit suicide, we'll get into a better life. Because it's not going to get better. To get to a better life, we have to work hard and do good work and work honestly. Question 951. Is the sacrifice of one's life admirable when it is made to save the lives of others or to be useful to them? So what about when people sacrifice themselves, so they commit suicide, to save the life of others? And the spirits answered, when incurred for such an end, it is inspirational. However, such a voluntary sacrifice of life is not suicide. God disapproves of useless sacrifices, and when pride tarnishes the intention as well. A sacrifice is only admirable when disinterested. If accomplished with a selfish end in mind, its value decreases in God's eye. So, when it is a sacrifice for other people's lives, then that's not even suicide. But we have to make sure the intentions are correct. So we can think of cases where, if we think about on 9/11, all the people that went to help, maybe knowing that they might not make it out, but they were just thinking about helping other people. Those people, that even though they may have lost their lives, that was not suicide, because they were truly just thinking about those other people, truly going to help other people. Or if we think about on 9/11, that the plane that was hijacked, and the people decided it was best to just crash it into a field than to let it go to the destination. So while those people died, it wasn't suicide. They were doing it to save all the other people around them, to save wherever that plane was going to hit. Or we see cases of let's say like bomb threats where one person jumps on top of it, and that might not be suicide. They were there trying to help all those other people. Or we see in school shootings when that teacher steps up and risk their lives for everyone else. So these are not suicide. Those are sacrifices. But we have to make sure that they are with the right intention. And we can't try and trick God that our intention, no, I was trying to help other people. Because God will know when we have a selfish reason in our head. But if we truly are just trying to help people, then that is not suicide. That is sacrificing and helping other people. But with that, we have to keep in mind that it's useful, right? We want to make sure if it's a useless thing, that, okay, maybe there's a bomb, we're going to drop on top of it, but no one else is around. So we have to think, we have to make sure it's a useful thing, and helping other people is the key things to keep in mind. And then Allan Kardec put his own comment in. He says, every sacrifice at the cost of our own happiness made for the sake of others is extremely commendable in God's eyes, because it fulfills the law of charity. Life is a human being's most valuable earthly possession. Those who renounce it for the good of the fellow being, rather than committing a crime, are making the ultimate sacrifice. However, before making this sacrifice, they should consider whether their life could be more useful than their death. So when we're doing this, like they're saying, for a sacrifice at the cost of our own happiness for other people is great, because we're demonstrating the law of charity. We're thinking about other people before ourselves. And like we said, our lives, that's our most valuable possession that we have. That's our most valuable earthly possession. So we have to make sure we make good use of it. So maybe let's think, so of course it's like a lot of thinking involved too. We can't just say, oh, okay, I can just do this and it's fine. No, we have to think it through and think, oh, would it be better? Would it be better for me to go and help these people and die right now, or to stay alive and help in some other way? So we also have to keep in mind a lot of these things, but these sacrifices are not considered suicide when they happen in this manner. Question 952. Are people who fall victim to excessive indulgence in passions that they know will hasten their death, but to which they are uncontrollably addicted to, committing suicide? So here they're saying, so people who fall excessively indulgent, so like addicted to passions, which they know will quicken when their death is going to come, but which they're uncontrollably addicted to it. Like we see a lot with drugs or alcohol and many other things that might be dangerous to people, but they're addicted to it, and maybe uncontrollably. So is that committing suicide? If you kind of know that the thing you're doing could lead to your death earlier? And the spirits answered, this is moral suicide. Do you not see that in this case such persons are even guiltier? They are guiltier of lacking resolve, of the sin of depravity, and of neglecting God. So in these cases, this is moral suicide because we knew in our head that these things that we were doing were not so great, but we kept doing them. And then now we created this uncontrollable addiction, but it all started from us allowing ourselves to go into these passions that we knew were harmful for us. So now we're even guiltier because now we knew, we had the moral consciousness to not do that, but we did instead. And then there's a second part to this question, and it says, would this person be more or less guilty than the person who commits suicide out of despair? So now compare these people who are going into a passion that they know is going to kill them, that's going to cause harm to them, or versus the person who commits suicide out of despair, as we talked about before. And the spirits answered, such individuals are guiltier because they have had time to reflect on the suicidal nature of the course they are pursuing. When a person commits suicide impulsively, sometimes a degree of confusion or disorientation is quite similar to madness. The former is punished much more severely than the latter, as the penalties for a crime are always proportionate to the consciousness and intention of the wrong committed. So these people are even guiltier because the thing that they're saying here is that when someone does something impulsive, a lot of the times they're confused, they are disoriented, they don't really know, and of course you're still going to pay there's still going to be a big punishment to repay, but they're kind of confused, disoriented. It happened so fast, they weren't thinking straight, and they committed suicide. But in these situations that we're talking about, these people knew what they were getting themselves into. They knew, oh, this is bad for me, but they continued to do it, knowing that death was a possibility. So now they have the consciousness. They were thinking about this. They knew what was coming, and they didn't stop it. So that's an even guiltier situation because you had the right moral capacity to know that that was wrong and to think straight of what was occurring. Question 953. When people face an unavoidable and terrifying death, are they guilty for abridging their suffering by voluntary death? So here they're saying, so people are facing an unavoidable and terrifying death. Like they're going to face a death that's going to be really horrible. Are they going to be like guilty if they kind of have a voluntary death so they don't have to go through the terrifying death? And the spirits answered, it is always wrong not to wait for the end appointed by God. Besides, how can people tell whether the end of their life has really come, or whether some unexpected help may reach out to them at what they believe to be their last breath? So, we should never, even in that situation, we should never go or end our lives before the time appointed by God. And at that point, we don't need to end our lives. God has that appointed for us. So it's wrong not to wait for the end that God appointed to us. Because how do we really know? What if someone's going to miraculously save us? Because we don't know the time that God appointed to us. So what if we see that, oh my God, this only option is going to be this terrifying death, but last minute something changes and then it doesn't happen because it wasn't our time to die yet, because God knows those things. God has that under control. So in those situations, we never know. Maybe we will get saved. Maybe it will be better. So it's always going to be wrong for us to do that before God. And then there's a second part to the question, and it says, we admit that in ordinary circumstance, suicide is reprehensible. But what about the times when death is unavoidable and life can be abbreviated for only a few moments? So, in ordinary situations, we can think, oh yeah, I can be saved. But what about when death is like really unavoidable, like it's really happening? And so, but life can be abbreviated, like only a few short moments in advance. Then what? And the spirits answered, it always means a lack of resignation and submissiveness to the will of the Creator. So, no matter what, even if it's 1 minute before the time that you're supposed to die, we're still going against the time that God wanted us, the God's plan. So whether it's 1 second before, a minute before, an hour before, a few days before, it doesn't matter. That all is against the time. We should wait for God's planned time for our departure. And there's a third part to this question, and it says, in this case, what are the consequences of this action? So now they're saying, okay, so what happens? What are the consequences if you do this, even though death is right there, death is unavoidable, but you commit suicide? And the spirits answered, atonement proportion to the gravity of the mistake, according to the circumstances under which it was committed, as always. So as always, our atonements are what we're going to be repaying for, making up for our mistakes. They're going to correspond with what we did. So everyone's atonements are different. They're individualized. They're specialized for us. So depending on the gravity of the mistake, what you were thinking, the circumstances of what happened, as always, as all the things we do, it's on each person basis. It's not like, oh, if you do this, this is going to happen. No, it's depending on the person, what they were thinking, why they did it, all these reasons. But the atonement is always going to be proportional to the act. So we know some things are just really, really wrong, and then some things are like medium wrong, and some things are a little wrong. So the atonements are also going to be proportional to those levels. So that's really off today. And again, I'd like to remind you all that we are talking about this topic, which is a very heavy topic. And if at all you guys want to talk more about it with someone, feel free to email me at cardiacradioforteens@gmail.com. Or if you yourself are thinking of suicide, or you know a friend, or you've experienced something, or if you just want to talk about something and get it off your chest instead of keeping it bottled up inside you, feel free to contact me, and I can direct you to someone that's more informative than me. Or if you just want to talk as friends, we can talk as friends. So please always feel free to reach out to me or reach out to anyone that you trust in your life as well to talk about these topics in more detail, because it's a very prominent issue in today's society that we're going through a lot. So it's important that we all are talking about it with one another, being honest to ourselves about it as well. So again, if you'd like to contact me, please reach out at cardiacradioforteens@gmail.com, and I'll get back to you right away. And before we leave off today, I'd like to read our message from the Daily Book of Positive Quotations by Linda Picone for today's date, October 23rd. This one's titled, A Light from Within. People are like stained glass windows. They sparkle and shine when the sun is out, but when the darkness sets in, their true beauty is revealed, only if there is light from within. We know many people who are a delight to be around when things are going well. They're gracious and kind, funny and warm. We're happy to have them as friends. We know fewer people who are equally delightful to be around when things aren't going so great. These special few manage to be gracious and kind, funny and warm, even when times are dark for them, and when we are suffering and needy, and maybe not such a light ourselves. I can be a good person in good times. I will strive to be a good person in difficult times as well. I'm Bia, and this has been Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening. This has been Cardiac Radio for Teens. Thank you all for listening.